They noticed him the moment he stepped into the terminal. Not because he was loud. Not because he was rude. But because he didn't belong, or at least, that's what everyone silently decided. The man stood near gate 47, shifting the weight of a small backpack on his shoulder. Grease stains darkened the knees of his faded jeans. His jacket smelled faintly of engine oil, the kind that never quite washes out no matter how hard you scrub. His hands were rough, nails permanently darkened, the hands of someone who worked with machines instead of people. And beside him stood a little girl, no more than 7, clutching a worn stuffed bear with one ear sewn back on crookedly. The father knelt eye level with her. "Almost there, sweetheart," he said gently. "First time flying, remember?" She nodded, wide-eyed, pretending to be brave. Around them, the terminal buzzed with polished shoes and rolling luggage. Business travelers in tailored suits typed furiously on laptops. Influencers adjusted scarves and checked reflections in phone screens. A pair of men in first-class tags whispered openly as the father walked past. "Is he on this flight?" One murmured, eyebrows lifting. "Must be lost," the other snorted. "Or sneaking on." The man pretended not to hear. He always did. At the counter, the gate agent scanned his boarding pass, hesitated, then scanned it again. "Sir," she said, her voice tight with confusion, "this seat, are you sure this is yours?" He smiled politely. "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes flicked to his clothes, then back to the screen. Something didn't add up, but the system didn't lie. "Well," she said slowly, handing it back, "boarding will begin shortly." As he stepped away, a woman in heels leaned toward her friend and whispered loud enough for him to catch. "Imagine sitting next to that for 6 hours." The father felt his daughter's small fingers tighten around his hand. "Daddy," she whispered, "did I do something wrong?" His heart cracked just a little. "No, baby," he said softly, kneeling again. "Some people just forget how to be kind." Boarding was announced. First class was called. The man stayed seated. That didn't go unnoticed. Passengers rose in a smooth wave of confidence. Designer coats, leather briefcases, confident smiles. When the grease-stained father finally stood and joined the line, a murmur rippled through it. First class. A tall man in an expensive coat scoffed openly. "You've got to be kidding me." The flight attendant at the door paused when she saw him. "Sir," she said carefully, "economy boarding is later." He handed her his pass without a word. Her eyes widened.
"Oh."
The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. Her posture straightened.
Her tone changed.
"Right this way, sir." The whispers followed him down the jet bridge. "How does he afford that?" "Probably stole it. Some kind of scam."
The father said nothing.
He focused on his daughter, who stared in awe as the plane opened before them. Inside, the luxury cabin gleamed, soft lighting, wide seats, quiet dignity. Conversation stopped as he walked down the aisle, his boots leaving faint marks on the carpet. "Seat 1A.
He stopped.
A man already seated nearby frowned. "Excuse me," he said sharply. "I think you're in the wrong row." The father checked the number. "No, sir." He helped his daughter into the window seat, buckled her in, then sat beside her. The silence was thick, uncomfortable. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else rolled their eyes. A woman across the aisle whispered, "This airline is really lowering its standards." The father closed his eyes for a moment. He had spent the last 3 days awake. 3 days crawling through metal compartments, hands deep inside engines most people were terrified to even approach. 3 days of fixing a problem no one else could solve, because if he didn't, this plane wouldn't be flying at all. But no one here knew that. To them, he was just a grease-stained single dad who didn't know his place. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We'll be pushing back shortly." As the plane began to move, a sudden jolt rocked the cabin. The lights flickered. A few nervous laughs rippled through the passengers. The father's jaw tightened. He felt it immediately. That vibration. That sound. His hand gripped the armrest. "Daddy," his daughter whispered. He leaned close, his voice calm but urgent. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just stay buckled. Outside, the engines roared louder as the plane lined up on the runway. The nose began to lift, and the grease-stained man's eyes narrowed. Something was very, very wrong. And before this flight was over, every single person who mocked him would wish they had paid attention. The moment the wheels left the ground, the father knew. It wasn't fear that tightened his chest, it was recognition. The plane climbed, smooth on the surface, but beneath the hum of luxury and calm there was a wrongness, subtle enough that only someone who had lived inside engines would hear it. A faint oscillation, a delay in thrust response that didn't belong in a jet this size. Most passengers leaned back, relieved as the ground dropped away. Champagne glasses clinked softly in first class. A man across the aisle loosened his tie, smiling like the world was exactly as it should be. The grease-stained father didn't smile. His fingers tapped twice against the armrest, then stopped. "Daddy," his daughter whispered again, her eyes searching his face. He turned to her, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just listening," he said. "Planes talk, you know." She frowned. "Like people?" "Sort of," he replied. "Only quieter." The vibration returned, brief, then gone. The engines compensated, masking it beautifully. Whoever designed the system was good. Very good. But not perfect. A man too rose back, leaned forward, irritation clear in his voice. "Could you stop tapping?" he snapped. "Some of us are trying to relax." The father nodded immediately. "Sorry." He folded his hands together, grease still faintly visible in the creases. The man scoffed and leaned back, muttering under his breath. 10 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign chimed off. Flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisle, their smiles trained, voices soft. One of them paused near the father's row, glancing at his daughter. "First time flying?" she asked kindly. The girl nodded. "Daddy fixes airplanes." The words landed like a pebble dropped into still water. The attendant blinked. "Oh," she said, polite but clearly unconvinced. "Yes, ma'am," the father added gently. "Just maintenance." She smiled, the kind reserved for indulging children, and moved on. Across the aisle, the woman who had complained earlier rolled her eyes. "Sure he does," she whispered to her husband. The father heard. He always heard. Another vibration. Longer this time. His jaw clenched. This wasn't turbulence. This wasn't weather. This was internal, rotational imbalance on the left engine spool, compensating late. He pictured the schematics in his mind like old friends, the pressure sensors, the bypass ducts, the autocorrect sequence. They were running closer to the margins than anyone realized. He pressed the call button. A flight attendant arrived moments later, her smile professional but tight. "Yes, sir?" He lowered his voice. "I need you to inform the cockpit that there's an abnormal vibration on engine 2 during climb. It's intermittent, but it's there." Her smile froze. "I'm sorry. I work on this model," he continued calmly. "If the oscillation increases at cruise, you'll see fuel flow anomalies within 20 minutes. She stared at him, eyes flicking briefly to his clothes, his boots, his hands. "Sir," she said carefully, "the cockpit has full diagnostics." "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm concerned." A man nearby laughed softly. "Unbelievable," he said. "Now he's a pilot too." The attendant straightened, her voice firm. "I'll let them know," she said, the words clearly chosen to end the conversation. She walked away. Nothing happened. The plane leveled off. The cabin relaxed again. Conversations resumed. Laughter drifted through the air. The father exhaled slowly, but his eyes stayed locked on the ceiling, listening. 5 minutes later, the vibration returned, sharper. Then came a sound most people mistook for nothing at all. A soft, uneven whine. His heart sank. That wasn't supposed to happen. His daughter shifted in her seat. "Daddy, the plane sounds funny." He wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You're very smart," he whispered. "Just keep listening to me, okay?" He pressed the call button again. This time, the attendant looked annoyed. "Yes, it's getting worse," he said quietly.
"Please. This isn't about me."
Ask the captain to check the left engine's vibration trend. Her lips tightened. I can't interrupt the cockpit for feelings, sir. They're not feelings, he replied. They're numbers. She hesitated, then shook her head. I'll pass along your concern. She didn't. The plane hit mild turbulence. A few gasps echoed. The seatbelt sign flicked back on. The murmurs started. Is this normal? They didn't say anything about turbulence. The father closed his eyes. The system was compensating too aggressively now, masking the problem instead of solving it. That was the dangerous part. Suddenly, the intercom chimed. Flight attendants, please take your jump seats. The tone had changed. The cabin went quiet. The father opened his eyes, every sense alert. He leaned forward, voice low but steady. It's time, he whispered to himself. Because when the plane lifted its nose just a little too high, he knew exactly what was coming next. The silence didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, stealing laughter first, then confidence, then breath. The plane's nose tilted upward just a fraction more than before. Most passengers wouldn't notice it. They'd trust the machine, trust the pilots, trust the invisible systems that promise safety at 35,000 feet. But the grease-stained father felt it in his bones.
Too steep. Too early.
The engines answered with a strained roar, one half a beat behind the other. The imbalance he'd been tracking finally broke through the layers of automation meant to hide it. A warning chime sounded in the cockpit. Then another. The cabin lights flickered, just once, but this time no one laughed. A baby cried somewhere behind them. Daddy, his daughter whispered, panic creeping into her voice. What's happening? He pulled her close, pressing her head gently against his chest. Remember what I told you about listening? He said softly. Now you listen to me. The seatbelt sign stayed on. No announcement came. That was worse. A businessman across the aisle glanced up, irritation fading into concern. Shouldn't they be saying something? The woman beside him clutched her armrest. I don't like this. Another vibration shook the cabin, strong enough this time that even the untrained could feel it. The whispers turned sharp. Did you feel that? That didn't feel normal. Why aren't they talking to us? The father unbuckled his seatbelt. A flight attendant gasped. Sir, you need to remain seated. He stood anyway, steady despite the sway. I need to speak to the cockpit, he said, his voice calm but carrying authority that hadn't been there before. The same man who had mocked him earlier scoffed weakly.
Sit down.
You're not helping. The father turned and looked at him, not angry, not defensive, just focused. I am, he said simply. Another alarm sounded, this one audible even in the cabin. The plane shuddered.
Hard.
The flight attendants rushed to their jump seats, fear breaking through their practiced composure. That's when the captain's voice finally came over the intercom. But it wasn't smooth. It wasn't confident. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain said, pausing, choosing words carefully, we're experiencing a minor instrumentation issue. Please remain seated. Minor. The father felt a cold clarity settle over him.
They were behind it now.
He moved toward the front before anyone could stop him. The plane dipped slightly, then corrected too sharply. His daughter screamed. Daddy. I'm here, he called back. Eyes closed, sweetheart. A senior flight attendant blocked the cockpit door, her face pale. You can't be here, she said, her voice trembling. This is restricted. He met her gaze. What's your left engine vibration reading? He asked. She blinked. I don't know. Then you need me, he said. Because it's spiking past safe limits and your autothrottle is hiding it. Another violent shudder rocked the plane. A scream ripped through the cabin. The attendant swallowed hard and grabbed the intercom phone, dialing the cockpit. Captain, she said urgently, there's a passenger here claiming. Maintenance, the father cut in. Lead maintenance. I signed off on this airframe 3 days ago. There was a pause. Then a voice crackled through the handset, sharp now. What did you say? I said I signed off on this plane, the father replied. And the fix you're trusting isn't holding. Silence. The engine screamed as the nose pitched up again. Captain, the first officer's voice shouted faintly in the background. The father leaned closer to the door, speaking fast now. Reduce climb rate. Manually limit engine to thrust. You're chasing a ghost because the sensor lag is feeding you clean data. The captain hesitated. Who is this? Someone who knows this plane better than your screens do right now, the father said. And if you don't act, you're going to lose that engine. The words hung heavy. Another shudder. Then relief. The engine noise softened. The nose leveled. The plane steadied, like a wild animal finally feeling a firm hand. The cabin went dead silent. No one spoke. No one breathed. The father sagged slightly as the tension eased, then straightened again. This isn't over, he said quietly into the phone. You need to divert.
Now.
A long pause followed. Then the captain's voice came over the main intercom, no longer polished, only honest. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be diverting to the nearest airport as a precaution. A precaution? The irony nearly made the father laugh. Around the cabin, shock rippled into realization. The businessman who had scoffed earlier stared at the grease-stained man in disbelief. The woman who'd whispered insults covered her mouth, eyes wide. The little girl in seat 1A peeked up at her father. Daddy, she whispered, did you fix it? He kissed her forehead gently. I helped, he said. And for the first time since boarding, no one doubted him. No one spoke as the plane began its slow, careful descent. The engines no longer screamed, but they didn't purr either. They worked, strained but obedient, like muscles holding together after a near tear. Every passenger felt it now, the fragile calm, the awareness that something invisible had almost taken everything from them. The cabin that once whispered with judgment now sat frozen in reverence. Seat 1A had become the center of gravity. The grease-stained father returned to his seat, his movements measured, controlled. His daughter clutched his sleeve, her small hand shaking. You okay? He murmured. She nodded bravely. You said to listen. A flight attendant approached slowly, no trace of irritation left in her face. Sir, she said softly, kneeling beside him, the captain would like to speak with you again. He nodded once and took the handset. The captain's voice came through, steady but humbled. We're running your numbers now. You were right. The vibration trend was masked by the compensator. The father closed his eyes briefly. I know. You signed off on the repair? The captain asked. Yes, he said. But I didn't approve the temporary sensor bypass. That wasn't supposed to be airborne. Another pause. We're diverting to Denver, the captain said. Safest runway and maintenance support. Good choice, the father replied. When the call ended, the attendant stayed kneeling, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry, she said. For how we treated you. He shook his head. You did your job. She swallowed. You saved our lives. He looked back at his daughter. I did my job. The words traveled faster than any announcement. Passengers leaned toward one another, whispering, not with cruelty now, but awe. That was him. He knew before anyone. My God, we almost. The man who had snapped at him earlier stood awkwardly in the aisle, gripping the seat back. Sir, he said, voice tight, I owe you an apology. The father met his gaze, calm as ever. Make it count, he said. The man nodded, ashamed, and sat back down. As the plane descended, the sky outside darkened, clouds thickening. Rain streaked across the windows like nervous fingers. The little girl pressed her face to the glass. Are we safe now? We will be, her father said. Planes don't give up easy. The wheels hit the runway with a heavy, decisive thump. A collective breath exploded from the cabin. Applause broke out, not polite, not restrained, but raw. Some people cried openly. Others pressed hands to mouths, shaking. The father didn't clap. He just closed his eyes. Emergency vehicles followed them as the plane taxied to a stop. The engines finally shut down, leaving behind a ringing silence that felt sacred. The captain emerged from the cockpit moments later. He was younger than most expected, his uniform crisp, his face pale with the weight of what had nearly happened. He walked straight down the aisle until he reached seat 1A. Then, Without hesitation, he extended his hand. "My name is Captain Harris," he said. "And I want everyone here to know that this man prevented a catastrophic failure." Cameras came out. Phones lifted. The grease-stained father hesitated, then shook the captain's hand. "I just listened," he said quietly. The captain turned to the cabin. "This aircraft should never have taken off with that condition. That's on us." A murmur rippled. Respect, gratitude, humility. The woman who had complained earlier wiped her eyes. "I judged you," she whispered as he passed. "I'm so sorry." He paused. "So did I," he said gently. "Once." She blinked, not understanding. He moved on. Paramedics boarded. Engineers followed. They examined the engines, shaking heads, whispering in tight circles. One of them looked up sharply. "Who caught this?" The captain pointed. "That man." The engineer's eyes widened. "Wait," he said, stepping closer. "You're him." The father sighed softly. "Depends who's asking." "You wrote the override protocol," the engineer said, disbelief clear. "We study your work." The cabin erupted again, this time with stunned laughter and disbelief. The grease-stained single dad wasn't just maintenance. He was the mind behind the system that saved them. And now, as passengers stood to disembark, no one pushed past him. They waited, because respect, once earned the hard way, walks slowly and follows quietly behind. The applause faded, but the silence that followed was different now. It wasn't fear anymore. It was reckoning. Passengers stood in the aisle holding their bags, no one rushing, no one complaining. They watched the grease-stained father help his daughter into her jacket, carefully zipping it up as if they were just getting off a bus instead of a plane that had narrowly avoided disaster. A woman approached hesitantly, clutching her purse to her chest. "I've flown for 20 years, she said, voice trembling. "I never once thought about who keeps these planes safe." The father offered a small smile. "Most people don't," he said. "That's kind of the point." Another man stepped forward, eyes wet. "My son wants to be an engineer," he said. "I hope he grows up like you." The father knelt so his daughter could hear too. "He already can," he replied. "Just teach him to care." The girl squeezed her bear proudly. Emergency crews waited outside, lights still flashing though the danger had passed. Rain fell softly now, like the sky itself was finally breathing again. As they stepped onto the tarmac, the cold air hit the father's face. He inhaled deeply, grounding himself. For the first time in hours, his shoulders relaxed. A senior airline executive approached, flanked by staff. "Sir," she said, extending a hand, "I'm Vice President of Operations. We'd like to formally thank you." He shook her hand politely. "You should thank your pilots," he said. They listened. She hesitated. "We'd also like to talk to you about a consulting role." He glanced down at his daughter. "Does it come with weekends?" he asked gently. The executive blinked, then smiled. "We can make that happen." The girl tugged his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, "are you famous now?" He laughed softly, the sound unfamiliar and used. "No, sweetheart," he said. "Just useful." News vans waited beyond the gate. Headlines were already forming, but he didn't look at them. Because fame wasn't what stayed with him. What stayed was the look on those passengers' faces, the moment judgment cracked and understanding rushed in to fill the space. Later, in a quiet terminal cafe, he sat with his daughter, sharing fries. She swung her legs.
"Daddy."
"Yes. Why were they mean before?" He considered the question carefully. "Sometimes people decide who you are before you ever speak."
"That's silly," she said.
He smiled. "It is." She leaned against him. "But you fixed the plane anyway." "Yes," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Because the work matters, even when people don't see you." Outside, another plane lifted its nose into the sky, smooth, confident, trusting invisible hands. The father watched it go, grease still on his sleeves, pride finally where shame used to be. Because that day, somewhere between judgment and altitude, the world learned a quiet truth. You should never underestimate the ones who keep everything else flying.